This is Duke University.
Hi, everyone. If you could take your seats, that'd be great. So we're really excited to have you here for our 2015 Duke MBA Entrepreneurship and Venture Capital Conference. I'm Casey Ackerblom, one of the outgoing EVCC presidents. And although many MBAs often go to work for large corporations, we aim to amplify and encourage the entrepreneurial community here at Fuqua and in the broader Durham community. And never before have so many industry incumbents been challenged by entrepreneurs with new and disruptive ideas. So our goal here today is to hear from an exciting set of entrepreneurs and company founders about how they identified some potential opportunities for disruption and how they forged their different paths into entrepreneurship. With that, I'll hand it over to Justina Kwong, who's our incoming EVCC co-president.
Thank you, Casey. Thank you, everyone, for coming today. I know there was a lot going on, and so we really appreciate you showing up here today. First of all, wanted to welcome our wonderful panelists and speakers, and then walk you through our agenda for the day. So first, we have Manuel, who's the entrepreneurial finance professor here at Duke. And then we have Anshuman, who's the founder and CEO of Bulldog Gin. Then we have Kip Frey, who is the founder of K9 Inc. and also a successful venture capitalist. And just to walk you through the agenda briefly, we're going to go through this panel, and then we're going to have Mark Rampolo, who's the founder and CEO of Zico, and then also a heavy investor in all of the great snacks that you see up front, and he'll be our keynote. Then we're going to move this to the Winter Gardens, where there'll be a Bulldog Gin tasting, so please stay for that, and then just a very casual mixer reception-esque thing, okay? And without further ado, please begin.
Thank you, and welcome everybody. So let me start. So I'm going to ask the two panelists to introduce themselves. I am indeed Manuel, the professor of entrepreneurial finance. And the only thing I want to say, just to set the rules, I would encourage people to ask questions. It becomes a lot more interactive and interesting if people have questions to ask. I think there's many things I also want to ask. But I'll let Anshuman and Kip just introduce themselves, tell a little bit about their story, and then we'll start asking. Kip, do you want to start?
First? Thank you. Thank you for having me today. I am currently professor of the practice at the law school and the School of Public Policy here. But my career in entrepreneurship kind of has three parts to it. I started out as a lawyer in Hollywood, actually, advising movie clients, and ended up back here and through a series of events ended up running 3 startups in the mid to late 90s. And let's see, all 3 of them worked out really well, and all of a sudden I had a bunch of venture capital friends. And one of them, one of the funds asked me to join as a VC, and I was a partner at InterSouth Partners here in town for about 10 years. And over the last couple of years, I've started 2 other companies, the most recent of which is a company called K9 Inc., which is really a corporate name, but the actual, what the company does, I formed it with another professor here who is in evolutionary anthropology. And believe it or not, what this company does, it has created the Myers-Briggs test for your dog. And it's called Dognition, and it's truly an amazing, it's deadly serious science, but that's what the company does. The final thing that I do on campus primarily is I work with the Innovation and Entrepreneurship Initiative, and we've been active in a lot of things through the leadership of Eric Toon, and most recently, we're going to talk about it a little bit, we've created an angel network that will be for Duke-affiliated entrepreneurs and investors. So that's really going to kick off this spring. That's it.
Great. I'm Anshuman Vohra, founder and CEO of Bulldog Gin. Really happy to be here. Thanks for the invite, and quite an honor to be at Duke. My story is I was an investment banker out of college, out of undergrad. And after a while, I realized that I didn't want to kind of do that for the long term, but I always had a burning desire to live the dream and have my own company, have my own product. And I don't know if you know, but most bankers know a lot about, a little bit about finance, but a lot about alcohol. So it was not a very hard transition for me to make. And I'd been imbued with a love of gin and tonics from my dad since a very young age. And I thought that there was a real opportunity to kind of make drinking a gin and tonic, creating a gin that was for my generation and sort of just stylish and edgy and premium, and something that was an emotionally appealing cocktail to have with a brand that I could call my own. So I set about creating a brand of gin called Bulldog, and happy to say that we finally got our act together. And Bulldog today, we're distributed in about 65 countries around the world. We're the fastest growing premium gin. And I'd love to share whatever I can with you guys, because I've sat in your shoes before.
So let me follow up on that. So you said you finally got it right. So what was the original idea? How did you finally get it right? And what is it that's different? Is it the branding? You wanted a different image? What is it that you were after?
Yeah, well, man, it would take me a long time to answer that, given all the changes I've gone through. But I would say that the original idea was to create a very, very distinctive brand within the stodgy category of gin. So I wanted a premium, edgy, modern gin, kind of like a Kettle One or a Belvedere 4 gin, if you will, that was noticeably lacking, that had great taste and very high quality. And that thesis hasn't changed. I think we've accomplished that part of it. What I was completely unprepared for in the consumer product space was how difficult, and certainly in the alcoholic beverage space, how difficult the distribution was. So while the original idea was to sell 95% of our sales, to have them be in the US within 5 years, 5 years into it, 95% of our sales were outside the US. And I found it far easier to scale up in places like Europe, especially in Spain, which is the world's largest per capita premium gin market. Kind of happened serendipitously. So we found that expanding in the US and scaling up would take far longer and more expensive than we thought. But we saw a real opportunity within Europe that was underserved at the moment. People weren't focusing on it, and we were able to capitalize on that. That allowed us then to move forward and do the global distribution deal with Grupo Campari that happened about a year ago, that allowed us to further expand the brand under their umbrella. So having the muscle of a major distribution partner solved that problem in terms of, how do we get it onto the shelf? How do we expand to different countries? How do we scale up much more quickly? Because that's not an area of expertise that we have. I'm sort of a brand builder and a marketer. The distribution muscle, logistics, et cetera, is not my area of expertise, but it is theirs. So being successful in certain parts of business made us attractive enough to be able to dance with them.
All right, Kip, can you tell us a little bit, because you've had experience in a number of your own companies and as a VC, when you started companies, what were you looking for? Like, what made you say, this is a good idea, I want to commit to this, I want to try to build this?
Well, the way I would answer that today is knowing how venture capitalists think. There are really just a few key things. I want to make sure that the market is very large. I want to make sure that in some way we have some unfair advantage over anybody else who might try to compete with us, either through technology or a first mover advantage or some other thing that we used to call at our firm secret sauce. And I want to know that there are some other people involved who are really, really good and who will be passionate about this and do the process with me. And with those things, if you've got a market that you can address that's quite large, if you've got something that provides some type of intellectual property-based, hopefully, advantage, and if you've got the right team, those are the main things. I happen to be running a company now that is a consumer brand also, but it's focused toward dog lovers. I don't even own a dog, but I know that there are 70 million households in America that have a dog, and each of them has 1.6 dogs, as a matter of fact. And so it's a very, very, if you get this thing started, it's a very big deal. I would never, ever have the courage to go start a brand where there's so much competition already. You were really good articulating the differentiation, but it takes way more guts to do something where the space is already occupied than it does to try to start something that's kind of new.
Is that your market? So you think about your potential market as dogs. Because there's 100 million dogs or 110 million dogs. So is that how you think about it? And maybe every dog will.
No, dogs don't buy anything, but their owners do. And my market is very, very passionate dog owners who consider their pets part of their family, and who want to invest in enriching the relationship that they have with their dog. And it turns out that, as many of you may know, if you have a dog or you know families like this, it is absolutely the case that a very significant number of them are incredibly emotionally attached to their dog. And they will do almost anything to improve the quality of life and the nature of the relationship they have with that dog. And if you can know the dog as an individual rather than a breed, that's my market right there.
Anshuman, can you tell us a little bit about sort of how you prepared? Because you said it seems like if you're selling drinks, certainly if you have a new beer, that distribution would be something that you would be concerned about. How did you prepare, and how did you get blindsided?
Sure. Well,
or maybe you didn't. I don't know.
I did get blindsided, and I'll tell you, a lot of has to do with the psychology of where I was at the time. I did want to become an entrepreneur. I thought I had a great idea, and I didn't want to stay in banking. And so perhaps I wasn't as rigorous in my diligence as I should have been. On the one hand, bankers have a tendency to scrutinize too much and not take any risks. So you have to find the right balance. But I thought at that point in time that my challenge was going to be to create an amazing product that served a need in the market, that is something I would enjoy, that filled some white space in the market, and I did that. The problem was, and I was like, okay, people said, if you build it, they will come. And I thought that was the end of it, creating the product. I didn't realize that for some reason, not that I underestimated, but I didn't fathom how difficult the challenge would be of once the product is here, it's sitting in the warehouse, of getting it onto a bar shelf and then getting it to rotate off the bar shelf, just how difficult those two things were. And it is just being an outsider in the industry, I could never have thought about the fact that you have to go to a wholesaler, who then has to go to a bar, and that there's multiple competitors going to that same wholesaler, and then you have a finite window of time to get the bartender interested because that person has so many customers who come at night. So it was something I didn't really know enough. And quite frankly, part of me, while in retrospect I should have known more, there's part of me that is happy that I was as naive as I was, because I'm not sure that had I known how difficult it was, I'm not sure that I'd ever quit my job to do it.
So this is a good point, and please, people should jump in if they have questions. But let me ask about risk then, and how you thought. Kip, I'll start with you. How did you think about the riskiness, but it's really for both of you because of what you just said, the risk of becoming an entrepreneur, and how do you deal with that? Is it, you're either born with it or not, or is there a way to?
Well, I would say this. I would say that the biggest myth, maybe in all of entrepreneurship, is that entrepreneurs love risk. Entrepreneurs are largely like all of you. They don't wake up in the morning and say, what risk can I take today? How can I add more risk to my life? I need more risk. It's like I need more cowbell. Entrepreneurs find ways to get comfortable with risks that they think they can manage. And those risks take a lot of forms. One of the risks is leaving a job where you're doing well and making a lot of money and having no clear path toward making any money at all. Some of it is reputational, some of it is financial. There are a lot of things, but I will tell you, I've heard that statement so many times from entrepreneurs, which is, had I known how hard it was going to be, I probably wouldn't have done it in the first place. Probably the most important way to deal with risk is to kind of be naive about it. If you see something and you're passionate, there is nothing you're going to do that doesn't have risk. Figure out if the level of risk in what you're proposing to do kind of matches your profile of what you might be comfortable with, and then just go do it. But it is not the case that if you don't wake up in the morning thinking, how can I add more risk to my life, that you're not going to be a good entrepreneur. Risk is part of the package, but it's not the reason why people do things. The reason why entrepreneurs exist and thrive is what you just heard here. It's passion, it's a need to bring something to the table that isn't there before, and it's being a little bit willingly blind to all of the reasons why you shouldn't do this, and just going ahead and doing it.
Do you want to tell us a little bit about it? And do you ever think, oh, I wish I could go back? That Excel in when I was sitting at that desk.
Oh, well.
I missed that.
Well, do I wish that I could go back to sort of being an analyst at JP Morgan and working 100 hours a week? No, I do not miss that at all, let me tell you. I don't regret for 1 second the learning curve, everything. There's nothing I regret. I mean, would I make different choices about how the product was launched and what I did? For sure. If I could have that window to go back, I would do it for certain. But luckily, I think we've made a lot of mistakes, but we've also made some really smart choices, and those smart choices outweigh the mistakes that we made. But no, I would definitely not.
How were you thinking about risk back then?
At that point in time, I was in my late 20s, and my view of risk is probably different. Kip said it very articulately in terms of how people talk about risk. Mine's not going to be quite as eloquent, but when I thought about it, there was a risk, obviously, that I'd be leaving my job in banking without a paycheck for a while. It was tough. I have very traditional Indian parents who wanted me to be a doctor, so when I told them I want to go into the gin business, my mom started crying. Seriously, my dad said something very profound. He said, "Son, I think you've been drinking too much gin." And I said, with that type of support from mom and dad, how can I not be a huge success? And so for me, risk at that point was there's the opportunity cost. So I'm very comfortable in banking. Things are great. I didn't have an apartment, wasn't attached. I could have, I didn't necessarily need to leave. But for me, the bigger risk, or the way I viewed it, was did I want to wake up one day at 45 saying I had this great opportunity, and the last 20 years I didn't do it, and I knew the type of person I am, and I knew that it would eat away at me for the rest of my life, that I didn't do that. Even if I had failed, the fact that I had something and I thought it was huge, that if I had put my chips on the table and known that I'd worked, left no stone unturned, that I could have made something of it. That scene in On the Waterfront where Marlon Brando says, he could have been a contender, I could have been somebody. I just never wanted to be that. So to me, that was a bigger risk, waking up one day and having squandered that opportunity.
Can I add one thing before we go on? So part of how risk plays into your life has to do with your life situation. And one bit of advice that I would give everybody is, if you think you might have an entrepreneurial effort in your future, do not put yourself in a life situation that stacks up against that. Don't buy a big house when you're 24 years old, okay? Don't get attached to a boat or something, or something. It is really easy when you're at that stage of considering whether the risk is worth it to think of reasons to say no and not do it. And if your life is kind of more, if you've got more obligations, and if your life is set up in a way that the perception is even greater of the downside of that risk, you're going to be much more likely to say to yourself, this is just too much. I need a good excuse not to do it, okay? And so, for you guys contemplating becoming entrepreneurs, think about that in terms of the major commitments you set up in your life as you get started, and understand that the more of those commitments that are part of your situation, the harder it's going to be able to make that kind of choice.
Well said. Just there's something I wanted to add to what Kip said in my personal experience. I took a risk. I don't necessarily wake up every day saying I want to take risks. I like to mitigate risks wherever possible because I'm a pretty conservative guy. One thing I did right, many mistakes I made, one thing I did right was while I still had my day job, I wrote the business plan, raised the money, got everything ready, and I told my investors that I would quit my job if and only if we raised a certain amount of money and we got the business plan and the product, et cetera, to the place where everything was ready and I could make a sort of a move to something that was real, as opposed to waking up one day telling my boss, take this job and shove it, and then I'm going to figure out what I want to do. I see that mistake a lot. People say, that's it, I've had enough, I don't like my job, I'm going to quit. And then they find, with nothing to walk into, that there's a lot of pressures that build on you. How are you going to pay rent, et cetera? Because invariably these things take a lot longer than you expect them to. So I would advise you, if you have a job and you're thinking of doing it, make sure you have everything lined up as much as possible and wait to that last moment to then make the plunge.
So every entrepreneur I know, literally every real entrepreneur I know, never thought of calling themselves an entrepreneur while they were doing it. It's always they say, I guess I was an entrepreneur, okay? Nobody, I would argue, smart, wakes up and says, I want to be an entrepreneur as a concept, okay? It's about the substance of the thing you want to do, and then this kind of label of an entrepreneur gets attached somehow. Part of how we talk about entrepreneurship and teach it here at Duke and everywhere else, I think there's a misconception that being an entrepreneur is kind of like being a vegetarian or something like that. It's something you just choose before you know what to do. And the really good entrepreneurs figure out what they're passionate about, figure out how they can put that risk and fit it into their life and go do the thing. And then it turns out that they were an entrepreneur. I think that's probably, if you ask any entrepreneurs, that's more likely going to be the case than somebody. I meet high school students, classmates of my sons, and I say, what do you want to do? And they say, I want to be an entrepreneur. And I say, what do you want to be an entrepreneur about? And I don't have any idea, but I want to be an entrepreneur. I like that working for yourself thing, and that is not often the way it happens with entrepreneurs.
Yes.
This may be too much in the weeds, but with regard to the distribution of the gin, how did you handle the hurdles of not just going B2B or B to the wholesaler, but also dealing with alcohol being a controlled substance in the state of North Carolina and other places, and particularly in other countries? How did that throw off your initial marketing plan and distribution?
The short answer is with tremendous difficulty. And when I remember I quit my job, I was super excited. And then for some reason, chronologically, it was only 2 weeks after I quit my job that we had our first meeting with the distributor. And the distributor said, we love your product. This is amazing. I wish you a lot of success, but we can't sell it, so we're not going to take it on. So that was a major blow to my plan, because 90% of my business plan at that point in time that I'd sold my investors on was predicated on getting in with this distributor. So slight change in plan 2 weeks into it, which I actually thought about writing my boss an email being like, I'd love to come back. But at that point, having not been beaten down yet as an entrepreneur, I still had a little bit of pride left, so I decided not to email him. But the way it happened was, it first started bar to bar, like getting people, self-distribution is how it started. Getting people to come on board. We got a bunch of PR hits early on that really helped. During the crisis, it was a tough time. People were looking for stories about people who had left sort of Wall Street and started something else. We benefited a lot we got lucky on the PR front. So we developed a following in New York, because I realized that the only way this was going to happen was street by street or neighborhood by neighborhood, as opposed to some sort of gigantic national rollout. And it became sort of downtown New York we kept getting these calls from Spain. As I mentioned, it was a huge success story from us. They went in once-in-a-century biblical boom in premium gin consumption. We were right at the front end of it. And so it became much easier to scale up in Europe. And because of Spain, we got the rest of Europe. Because we did that deal, luckily our industry is very European dominated. The big, majority of them are European companies. So they noticed that over there and were able to ink a deal that made sense for us in the US, but for them in Europe. So I would say with tremendous difficulty, and it's finally only, I would say recently, in the last 7 or 8 months that we've cracked the code here in the US with a much bigger partner who were able to leverage their power and their profile with the distributors. As opposed to, you create your own drug, you can create your own drug and sell it, or you can create your own drug and have Pfizer sell it for you. I found through a lot of pain that the latter route is a better way to go if that's an option that's available, because that sort of clout and share of mind with the wholesalers you can never get as an independent.
So I have, go ahead.
Follow-up question to your response. When you're actually doing a B2B versus a B2C, you mentioned about how, say, Pfizer has better clout or wholesalers and stuff. But don't they extract a lot of margins from you by applying the same kind of pressure on you, as they do on the other side of the world?
Yeah, they do. They do. They take a standard sort of margin. But our industry in particular, it's mandated that we have to go to a distributor. I can't go B2C. B2C is not legally allowed in our industry. So it's great for the distributors. They've worked in a tremendous system for themselves where we have to go through them. So they get a margin. The frustrating thing for me is, as a small guy, at least initially, they would get that margin for not doing any work, just essentially for their trucks making a delivery. We would have to do all the work and sell and market. But now the equation has changed a little bit because they are more motivated to sell for Campari, who's our partner, who does, $2 billion in sales. They're more motivated to sell their products, and now they view us as a part of Campari's brand portfolio, and they say, well, we want to keep them happy, so we'll make sure that Bulldog is front and center in our mind, because that's a priority for them, so that means it's a priority for us.
So can you tell us a little bit about what I think this is a challenge that I hear about from people. Sort of they have a job, they want to start a business, they do have an idea. How did you get ready? What did that mean? Were you working nights and weekends and just getting your business plan ready? And what is it that you had ready? What does that mean? Because you hadn't had the conversation with the distributor. What did you have at that time? Free.
Right. So the genesis of this is, how this was born was every Friday, every banker's favorite day is Friday, the 3-martini lunch. For me, it was always like 6 or 7 martinis and no lunch, but it was like my favorite part of work because I'd have 2 hours of freedom on a Friday. But Friday was also the worst day in banking because you knew that 6 p.m. Friday, somebody would come to your desk. Somehow they would find you right as you're going to the elevator and say that they were going to make all your weekend dreams come true and lock you up in the office all weekend. So that martini lunch is a way of getting out of it. So for me, the idea was born then. I said, my friends are drinking vodka, I'm drinking gin. So the idea for the new premium gin started then. And it originally was something that became very interesting to me to find out that as I learned more that actually gin used to sell more than vodka 40 years ago, than vodka supplanted gin for various reasons. And as I studied it, it became almost an obsession of mine to see if, wow, I like gin more than vodka, but I see where gin is deficient versus vodka today and why it's taken over. And then, so I just started asking myself, did I think that's something that I could change and change in a meaningful enough way where it would be a viable business? So I quickly reached a conclusion, yes, without doing a whole lot of diligence on the industry. Now, my only experience in the industry was, large amounts of consumption of it. So I said, based on that, I think I'll do really well in it. I hadn't really studied the business part of it, but I said, yes, I'm certain that there's a market need for it and that I can figure out the rest. So how did I actually execute that? I kept the job. We had a bunch of interns who were extremely motivated, and I used my time during the office as much as possible, as well as nights and weekends to write the business plan, to raise money. As I mentioned, I'm generally a risk-averse guy to make sure that the moment I left, everything was in place to make it happen. But yeah, using that time, sort of the nights and weekends, is a really important component of what you do, because there's a million risks that are going to hit you. I call them unknown unknowns that you don't know that are going to happen. And the more that you can mitigate up front, the better off you will be, because the last thing you want is 40 different things hitting you on day one and you're not prepared for it and you have to, it's a difficult pill to swallow. So that's how I thought about that. And I knew what the stages would be. We hired an industry veteran early on, gave him some shares in the company to come on as a consultant, really for his expertise and also to help us make mistakes that I no doubt would have made on my own. That was very helpful. It added credibility with investors who at that point just viewed me as somebody in my late 20s banker who liked drinking gin a lot, but no experience as an entrepreneur, no experience in the business side of the industry. So those few steps I feel were pretty important.
So Kip, how does a VC think about a firm like this? Or how did your perspective going from an entrepreneur to a VC change in how you look at very young firms? Or did it change? Did you realize you were making mistakes? Or did you, are there mistakes you're able to better identify now relative to
Did I realize I was making mistakes
as an entrepreneur?
As an entrepreneur or as a venture capitalist?
As an entrepreneur. So once you gained the perspective of a VC, how did that change the way you look at very young firms?
I really didn't want to be funded by VCs. That was one. There are certain types of industries and companies that it's just a requirement. The capital need, if you want to do a pharma company or if you want to do a medical device company, you really need that. In general, though, what I would say is I find myself now much more aggressively trying to test. One of the answers to how do you get ready, what I find myself doing is really outgoing, trying to find opportunities to test my theory of why this is going to work with a really broad array of people who might have opinions about it. Because I saw so many pitches as a venture capitalist, and I saw so many deals get done that in retrospect, if somebody would have just asked the right question very early on, you would have been able to avoid the calamity that you now were a part of, or you would have been able to move in a direction, and from a capital efficiency standpoint, you would have been much better off. And so to me, now having been through that process and looked at it from that side, I'm very, very interested in trying to cover the waterfront in terms of people's opinions who might give me a different vector on what I'm thinking about. Just to give you an example with this crazy dog company that I'm doing, one of the things that I did was I was sitting with my co-founder, who is, as I said, a professor in evolutionary anthropology here. And I said, and he was saying, we've got to do this company, And I said, all right, I will do the company with you if you can get the 6 leading scientists in the world in the field of animal cognition to join an advisory board that we'll put together for this. And unfortunately, he pulled out his cell phone and he said, let's call him right now. I mean, he knew all of them, okay? Another example, I have a lot of friends who are TV producers, and I called several of them and I said, I'm thinking about doing a company, and what I really need more than anything else is a reality TV show to be a part of this, because people need to be given permission to believe this. And several of them said, we'd love to do it, and actually Dognition is going to start to air as a reality show on the National Geographic Channel in May, in about a month and a few days. So I kept trying to give people the opportunity to tell me why I'm crazy or I'm wrong from a lot of different perspectives. And in hearing their responses, I not only learned a lot about what I was going to do, but I probably proactively answered questions that I might not have thought about just in having conversations with them. So before I was a venture capitalist and I was running companies, I thought I was really smart. And I thought I could figure it out by the sheer weight of my intellect. And not only was I wrong then, but I watched about 1,000 other entrepreneurs be wrong in the same way. And now I'm very, very open about knowing almost nothing and seeking out lots and lots of people who are a lot smarter than me.
So tell us a little bit about the company itself. So what is it, and where are you right now? Where is the company right now?
So the company is, what this is, it's a collaboration between scientists at Harvard, Yale, Duke, and the Max Planck Institute in Germany. And what they've found out over the course of about 15 years of research is that dogs actually have individual identifiable elements of personality that you can kind of categorize in the way that the Myers-Briggs test categorizes human personality. And if you understand the cognitive strategies that an individual dog uses, you understand an incredible amount about how that dog operates in the world, as opposed to, well, that dog's a German Shepherd, so it ought to be this way. That dog's a poodle, so it ought to be this way. And what the company is it provides a series of games in which you play something guided by video that we put on your mobile device, and you press buttons as the dog does something, data comes back to us. When you're finished doing all of them, it creates a personality profile of that dog, and we give it to you, and then there's a lot more that follows. And then, so that is up and running. You can go see it at dognition.com. And then the TV show will start out by kind of doing a series of specials explaining the science, but then it's going to end up being MTV Cribs. And by that, we're going to visit famous people with dogs in their environment, get to know the dog, get to know the person, and then watch them as they learn about the dog as we test it. So that's the company. I know it's like the most ridiculous thing you've ever heard.
With the knowledge of this test, will it help a dog owner train the dog better, or just understand why they're doing it?
Yeah, so it will help you train your dog better, because now you understand that your particular dog really responds to gestures rather than voice, or really is very bonded to you as opposed to being individualistic and not caring much what you say. And so all of those things go into understanding how that dog responds to the various things in its life. And you become an owner that has a richer set of intuitions and understandings about why your dog is doing something in the way that he does it. And it increases the effectiveness of training. One thing it does is it really helps people if they're thinking about adopting dogs. We've done a pilot with shelters, and they test dogs, and then somebody walks in and they're basically given the Carfax for that dog. And now they understand the personality of what they're about to adopt, and what we've shown is that it increases it decreases the number of adoptions that go wrong, and the dog gets returned to the shelter by about 40%.
There's questions back there. Yeah, go ahead.
So my question is, Kip, you mentioned that when it comes to kind of mitigating risk and furthering your idea, you spoke about getting the leading scientists on board or getting the TV producers on board. But I'm trying to understand, so sometimes an idea might be highly disruptive and it might be doing things that people in the industry might think is not the way to do it, right? And there are many examples of startups that have done that and become successful. So how do you kind of reconcile the two when you try to get the leading industry experts of that industry on board, and they might say that it can't be done this way, or it historically hasn't been done this way?
Yeah, I think I heard you, and I'll try to answer, but if I don't, I just say it again. So if everybody in the industry that you ask about this says you're nuts, that's a pretty good indicator that you're probably nuts, okay? Now, there are probably extremely rare examples where everybody thought that somebody was wrong, but much more often, what you're going to hear is, well, you know, this is why I don't think this is going to work, but it's an interesting idea because of this. And somebody else might say, it'll never work, but you look at their position and you can kind of understand why, from their point of view, they might have that opinion. So talking with people and getting their ideas and their feedback, it's not always going to be, oh, what a great idea, go do it. And that's not what it takes to make a decision to do something entrepreneurial. But it is pretty, you know, if you're hearing from literally everyone why it can't work, if you're thinking of creating a gin company and your brilliant idea is you're going to sell this directly to people on the street corners in New York, and everybody tells you legally you can't do that, then that's a reason not to go in that direction, okay? So if what you're asking is, how do you reconcile lots of people giving you kind of dissonant type of feedback, if you have some knowledge of the industry to begin with that you're thinking about, or if you have some knowledge as a consumer, or you have a very strong feeling about what's missing from what's available in a market, as you know, that you're wanting to address, you can kind of understand why people with particular points of view might be telling you the reasons why it won't work. But usually you're going to hear other elements of your plan that have promise, that other people will give you a different perspective. But generally, there's not a very good way to reconcile everybody telling you that something is not doable if the reason they're telling you that is pretty fact-based and you know, unless you're just coming up with something completely different, it's not as hard as you might think.
So I'll go to you in a second. Let me. Oh, do you want a follow-on question?
Go ahead. Yeah, I get that, and it makes sense when it comes to scientific or tech, you know, very specific fact-based companies like yours, which has really, you know, certain theories or certain research that might come up. But when it comes to services, and I can think of, obviously it's cliched, but Airbnb, when everybody told them, so could we, how do we differentiate between people who have a bias in the industry? So obviously the hotel industry would say that it's not possible, right? So how do we reconcile that when it comes to something that does not have very strict facts or research behind that?
What was the last part of what you?
No, for example, when Airbnb asked people in the hotel industry, they obviously would say it's not going to work because they have a bias, inherent bias for their industry. So when it does not have research behind it, such as your company, when it's a service that has more business judgment involved, how do you kind of separate the two of them?
I don't know. Do you have a thought? Or?
So it's an interesting point because, you know, I think Peter Thiel was here a couple weeks ago, right? And he talks in his book about the difference between creation and disruption, right? And I think, you know, when I was reading that, I thought, damn, you know, Airbnb, Facebook, Google, those are the real disruptors of the world. And then I thought, wow, I'm not one of those guys, right? And I think that the reality is, if you want to be an explorer, right, you got to go to Mars nowadays, right? You got to really be out on an edge and living on that edge. And there are people that are going to do that, right? Somebody is going to create the next billion-dollar brand, the next trillion-dollar, you know, multi-billion-dollar industry. I think the reality is, though, that's a flyer, right? And so you got to make a call on how long you're going to bet, how hard you're going to go, how long you're going to say. But the reality is, if you want to be a successful entrepreneur, it might take 50 years, right? If you're willing to give 50 years on your idea and you believe in it that much, then go for it, right? But there's another lens which says, okay, how long are you going to wait? What impact could you make in that 50 years in different arenas, right? So I think if you do want to revolutionize the world, then you're probably going to have a lot of people telling you you're nuts, and you might be 75 years old and finally realize they're right. But if you've chosen that path, then go. But I think the pragmatic answer is, the reality is, for 99.9% of businesses, entrepreneurs, and what the world needs, it is disruption. It's disrupting existing industries, and I think there are I would agree, it's very rare you're going to find a situation where you've got, 19 out of 20 people telling you you're wrong and you're right.
Let me ask you, I think this issue of feedback, how did you, and I don't want to beat up on the distribution issue again, but you talk to people in the industry. Did you seek feedback actively, and sort of this thing that was central to your strategy somehow, people didn't address, people didn't notice, and did you realize the need for this active feedback from others?
Well, there's a few layers to that question. So did I research it enough? No. Did I ask people questions about distribution? Yes. I understood the structure of the industry is 3 tiers. You have to sell to a distributor who sells to a bar, who sells to a consumer, so I understood that. My assumption was that the key to success would be creating this great product, and that if and when consumers wanted it, that's it, the distribution problem would get solved. What I didn't realize is it's kind of a chicken and the egg, because consumers wouldn't necessarily want it until they've tried it in a bunch of places and they've seen it around, and that if they tried it once and then they didn't see it, that they would forget about it because it's out of sight, out of mind. So I don't think I probed deeply enough into the distribution element. And then also my baseline assumption was that the distributors would do what they're supposed to do, which is distribute the product. They have armies of salespeople, and I thought that they have trucks and armies of salespeople, that's what they do. What I didn't factor in was that certainly after the crisis, 99% of their income and their share of mind was with the big guys, and there's 1% left for the 5,000 other brands that they carry. So I didn't realize that they're, rather than a distributor, they're just a truck that delivers for us rather than a sales force that functions. So that sales force function that I thought we were going to outsource to them was a miscalculation, because that was non-existent for a small company like me.
Jay, you had a question back there?
Actually, I had a similar question, but there's another question that kind of popped up for me was, if you have a product idea, it seems like there's entrepreneurs that have this blow your mind idea that's completely new, and then there's entrepreneurs who take an idea and kind of make it better. So, I mean, I have a similar idea, and the feedback I've gotten from people is that, no, that's already been done, it's not going to work, just shut your idea down, come up with something new. So how do you rationalize that when I know that there's people out there who have taken an idea and made it better and made a lot of money over it, versus the feedback that I'm getting now?
And who do you want to direct that to? Both. Does anybody want to take it?
Well, I mean, that's really another version of how do you weigh opinions that aren't supportive of what you're trying to do, especially when you're doing something that is addressing a market that already has things similar to it, and the question is your idea different enough to be successful? And people are telling you it's probably not. Because frankly, when you look at a market and there are participants in it, it's just an easier answer to say to somebody, well, look, I mean, you want to make whatever, a new brand of gin. It's pretty easy for me to imagine that there are lots of other bottles of gin in stores when you walk in, or in bars, and so why you? Part of the answer is that you have to understand the undertaking as something that is a process that begins with a product but that ends with a sale. And your innovation may actually not be in how to make a significantly better product, but how to sell it in a different channel, how to find a market that doesn't know it needs it yet. So part of the innovation that may be important to you may not be exactly what people are responding to, okay? And if you can make that argument to yourself, test it with others, and convince yourself that maybe my product isn't that different, but I can sell it in a different way to a different audience, through a different channel. That may be a differentiation that actually adds a lot of value, that actually creates a lot of value. Conversely, if you do see a product or an existing market and you really know that market and you understand that what you have in mind is fundamentally different to that existing consumer's experience, then lots of people telling you that, well, the market is what it is and you shouldn't be changing, you might be able to convince yourself otherwise. I have a friend who is a great friend of Duke University who created iTunes. And he said to me, the day that they finally got it working and finally were able to kind of do the things that you do, he said a very interesting thing. He said, it wasn't just that parts of it were better, but every single step in choosing a song and downloading and everything was better. And he knew, and he called up Steve Jobs and said, this is going to be huge. But the point was, there was a market that already existed. People already consumed music. And yet, with a lot of will and a lot of resources, these guys created a completely different take on how that consumption process might work. And the rest was history with that.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I can see why ex-banker would launch a gin brand, as you have a very long, continuous relationship with this drink, or alcoholic drink. But I wonder, and my question is for Kip, why are you passionate about your product? Especially since you mentioned you don't own a dog. So besides the financials, what's your passion for this product?
My passion was that I had a friend whose entire life had led up to this moment of a scientific breakthrough that he needed my help to realize. And we did this project together. I didn't need to do another company, but in this particular case, I wanted to be a part. I really admire people with original ideas. I've never had one in my life. And I like being around that, even if it's not coming directly from me, I like being a part of that level of energy and passion and kind of felt need. And so in this particular case, in this company, I agreed to come on and become CEO of the company with my partner and co-founder who really knew how to do this stuff, because I thought that I had some knowledge and contacts and abilities that without those things, the entire project wouldn't really happen. But I was attracted to somebody else's passion in this particular case.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, both of you started a company in a sector in which you didn't have a lot of experience. So my question is, what strategies helped you the most to understand the market and then to compete with the leader brands?
Well, I would say for me, there's no teaching. There's no teaching so much as sort of being in the industry itself, right? Dumping yourself into it. That's the best way to learn. Surrounding yourself with people who know it. And then the best life lessons or business lessons I've had were mistakes I made, and looking back at them and seeing what I could have done to avoid them. I found those to be very helpful. And surrounding myself, I told you we hired this person with industry expertise to help us in the early part of the business. Having that person there to say, you should do X, you should not do Y because of this reason. And I love being, I'm generally a fairly intellectually curious person, so I'm a student of the industry. I like to see which other brands have succeeded, why do they succeed. I love to learn on somebody else's dime. So if somebody's made a mistake, and I know that that's a path to not to follow, then I love knowing that that person made a mistake and I could, avoid that, or if somebody did something successfully, I'd love to follow that, because I think a lot of the information is out there if you're actually just looking for it. a lot of times I feel people are blind to it for one reason or another, but a lot of the info is out there.
In my case, I didn't know a lot about the market that we were going into, but no one else in the world did either. This market didn't exist. This thing that we wanted to create literally didn't exist. Nothing like it existed. And that was a real appealing point of it for me, that, that we had a chance to literally create a category that, that not only would be unique, but I kind of had all of the scientists already in my camp. And if anybody wanted to try to do it, I already had all the scientists. So it was really going to be hard for anybody else to create something competitive. But actually, in my case, the fact that not only did I not know anything about it, but no one else did, was an exciting thing for me, just in terms of kind of understanding the magnitude and the scope of the opportunity.
Yeah, go ahead. You mentioned advisors earlier, and I'm wondering if you have any advice for us as we look at startups. What should we think about when we go to people? Who should we target for advisors? What should that relationship look like? I don't know a lot about that process. I'm just wondering if you guys have any tips for success when looking for advisors.
I have a couple of tips, especially in this community. The most important, but I think this is true across the board, the most important thing that you need to understand is that many, many more entrepreneurs will return your call than you think will. People tend to hesitate because they think they're being a burden. They think that you know, people will consider them rude or presumptuous for making calls. The truth is that every good entrepreneur is pretty aware of the fact that they were in your position at one time, and a huge percentage of them will respond to you in some way and help if they can. So the first thing is call more people than you're comfortable calling, and you'll be surprised at the level of response that you get. But I would add to that, have a reason for the person you're calling. Don't call someone because you saw them on TV or saw them in a newspaper, and I think it'd be a good idea to talk to you. Be able to articulate why you think they might have some knowledge that you could benefit from in one way or another, and lay it out and say, and be real simple and upfront and say what you need, and you really will be surprised at how much people respond to that. Do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I have a few things on that. One is, for me, I'm in an industry that's very marketing heavy, and I would definitely, one of the things I've learned is try to get a consultant or an advisor who's an operator as opposed to just sort of a CMO, sort of sitting in their office at a big company all day. You want somebody who has sat in the shoes that you're going to be sitting in. You want somebody who's been there and been, there's 3 months of cash left in the bank. What do I do? What decisions do I make? You want somebody with that level of experience as opposed to somebody who's been this chief marketing officer of Coca-Cola. It's a very different sort of profile of the person. Secondly, think about, as Kip said, what you want from that person. Do you want that person? How involved do you want them to be? What type of deal you want to give him? In our case, we gave that person shares in the company. We wanted to keep the incentives aligned because, what's the utility for this person? If the utility is, yes, this person is going to be a consigliere for me, make sure you have enough of their time. If you're going to use the fact that that person's involved to market yourself and to raise money, make sure that person is involved enough where, prospective investors can say, yes, I like this person's company because this board of advisors is very strong. So
and that they know that you're going to use them to
the last thing you want to do is say, yeah, so-and-so is on my board of advisors, then they get a call from somebody, you'd be like, never heard of this product.
That's good. Those questions are here.
My question is to Anshuman. So you are an investment banker, and if I'm correct, first generation entrepreneur.
Yes, correct.
And before you even took the plunge, you started raising money. So I'm curious to know about the fundraising process that you went through, like debt, equity, whatever. Because I'm just curious because you were a first-generation entrepreneur, as I mentioned, and you were not. How did you convince your investors that you're completely vested in that idea, that you're really going to take their plunge for them to invest in that idea in the first place?
Yeah. So, has anyone here ever raised money for an idea before? All right. So yours notwithstanding, I would say that the first word I would say in fundraising is, if you don't have it, you will get it. Is humility. You'll learn very quickly when you sit down in front of investors, basically tell you that this is the worst thing that they've ever seen, that you're going to fail, and that's your first 10 meetings. You know, if you're not able to, if you don't have a stomach for that, you shouldn't do it. But the way I did it was, as a banker, I learned how to put together a good business plan, to be concise. I learned how to present to investors. But my initial pitch was, I just went in myself, I wore a suit, I went to my friends and I said, hey, I'm going to get 20,000 from this person, 50,000 here, I'm going to be done in a week. It was very difficult for me to raise, the people who I thought I was going to raise money from was my banking colleagues. They were the most difficult to get to invest because they were not trained, they had no concept of evaluating an idea. You gave them IBM, they'd give you evaluation and an opinion on it in a second. Something that was on a sheet of paper, they had no clue. The problem was compounded by the fact that, as you mentioned, I was a first-time entrepreneur. They said, we know about your experience drinking gin, but the business of gin is not something that you really trust. You're young, you've never been an entrepreneur, so I had all those. But so that consultant added credibility. You know, I was able to do a few other things, like there's a really tight business plan. And in fundraising, as much as it's a science, there's an art. It's a very emotional decision very often. You need to get that one or two people who believe in you. You know, let's just say you're looking to raise $1 million. You know, once you get your first 300,000 or 400,000, that's the real hard part. The rest is really easy. Nobody wants to be the first person to cut you a check. So I would say that I was able to understand the dynamics on some of those and really, really quickly pivot to make the right things. But I told all my friends that I was only going to quit I put the money in escrow, said I won't spend a dime except for what we're spending on legal fees. And if we raise this amount of money over this period of time, then I will quit my job 3 months before we launch. And if we don't, I'll give you effectively 97.5% of your money back minus whatever we spend on legal fees. And they were very comfortable with that arrangement. So it de-risked it for me. For them, you know, they took technically like a 2% risk on their money, but they factored in the upside. And nobody was putting in next month's rent money into this in our first round anyway. So that's how we structured it.
There's one last question back there. Is that all right?
What advice would you give to some of us that are thinking about joining a company that's, you know, early stage, and we might not have the idea ourselves, but we want to pitch ourselves well to be part of a fast-growing company that we're really interested and passionate about? Like, what do you look for when you're thinking about hiring?
Kip, do you want to start?
So I have a couple of thoughts about that. Number one is most very early stage companies, the CEO is so busy doing things, they don't even know that they need something. And if you have the ability to look at the company and understand a skill set that maybe is missing, and come in and talk really clearly about why your particular skill set matches up with a need that maybe the CEO kind of notionally understands he or she needs, but hasn't even had time to think about it at this point. In other words, make it easy by painting the picture of how you will fit in for the CEO to say, yeah, that'd be great. The harder question is, how do you identify the right one? Because there are a million startups kind of walking around, and all of them would be happy, especially if you can do something for free or close to free, to bring you on. You know, you need to convince yourself that the need you think you're going to be filling is something that will be truly valued in that organization, and that the people that you're about to become colleagues with, if not partners with, are people that you know well enough that you can kind of hang in there when things get tough, and you know they won't bail, and they know you won't bail. And so to me, the two most important things are, is there a real match in skill sets for what you know and what needs to be done? And do you respect the team that you're joining enough to place a bet on them? Because, in a way, they're placing a bet on you, but the bet's a much lower type of level of thing. You're making a big bet. You really want to know whether or not, you would sit in a foxhole with those people.
The other thing that, as you're canvassing and thinking about the right company to go for, I hear this a lot, is friends of mine left their banking job, they joined this company, and then that company went out of business 3 months later, and it kind of really put them out. And I suggest you really do a lot of diligence to make sure this fast-growing company is adequately capitalized, that they're going to be around when you do join them, because that's a major, a lot of times people, if that first sort of 3 to 6 months of that entrepreneurial plunge is terrible, they're never going to go back to it. So making sure you go to, so if you go to an Uber, you're probably all set, but make sure that whatever you go to, that you've thought about whether the company is going to be around. And then when it's convincing the CEO they need you, tell them that you have a good sense of the fact that they spend every night awake being like, what's the world going to look like tomorrow and 5 years from now, and how are they going to make payroll? And that you can take this specific slice of problem away from them, and that you'll spend all the time and more to make sure that they don't have to worry about that one thing. I think they'd find that pretty refreshing to hear.
I think we're out of time. So thank you very much.
Thank you.